started. I know we have a jam-packed day today and with this launch of InsightsHub. So what's on tap for today is we'll do introductions again for those of you just joining, do the panel Q&A. Then we'll talk about what is an InsightsHub, set that up, and then Viv will do a product demo, and then we'll give it a chance at the end for audience Q&A about the InsightsHub, KnowledgeHound, whatever else is on your mind in relation to knowledge management. Some of the best minds here in the space are going to be talking about it today. So let's jump right in. So the panel discussion today will feature Vivek Bhaskaran, founder and CEO of QuestionPro. I'll be leading the panel discussion. I'm the president of research and insights here at QuestionPro. And we have Kristi Zuhlke, founder and CEO of KnowledgeHound. And Kristi, I'll give you an opportunity now to say a little bit about KnowledgeHound, what it is,
Sure.
and how this relates to the webinar today.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you so much for having me. I'm very, very passionate about this topic because when I started my career at Procter & Gamble in insights, and I worked on across various different brands, and I'd be in meetings and people would say to me, Kristi, what % of men shave in the shower? Or Kristi, what % of people use the cap for dosing laundry detergent? And I'm like, oh, I'm sure we know that. But how do I find it? And so we were spending millions of dollars in market research every year, but we didn't have a way to recycle our information. So we had a SharePoint and a share drive to find documents, but even still for documents, I mean, no, I'm not trying to be negative about our Microsoft friends and the suite there, but it really wasn't set up for the market research world. So it was really tough to even find things in Word documents and PowerPoints. But then I was even trying to look for information that was in data files and those SPSS files, those banner books you get back from your market research supplier. So what I did was I decided to leave my nice corporate job and start a tech company. Insane. And I created KnowledgeHound. So KnowledgeHound, you can think of us as as kind of a combination between Google-like search and Tableau type visualization. So when you combine Google and Tableau, you really get like this experience of search-driven analytics. And we ingest all of the data from your different survey platforms. Like we would ingest your data from QuestionPro into our platform, and then the other various platforms that you're using, if you're using any other platforms. But I know you love QuestionPro so much that you're only using QuestionPro. We would ingest that into KnowledgeHound, and then you can search. So you can type in your question, like what % of men shave in the shower, and we're actually going to search inside data files and then visualize it on the fly. So we are not necessarily knowledge management in the sense of how do you find documents, but we are a search component of that vision, which is very specifically on data. So we plug into knowledge management platforms and we power that survey data search inside knowledge management platforms. So that's what makes me a little bit relevant to this conversation, in that I've seen all the different players, in particular the market research space, that are trying to solve this problem of knowledge management, and we work with many of them, plugging into them. And so we've seen what works and we've seen what doesn't work. And so I'm here today to share with you what I've learned over the past 8 years of seeing what is going on in this space, and Viv can then take you through how they have innovated against kind of what the holes are in the market today.
Great. No, thanks, Kristi. That's a great introduction. We're happy to have you today. And I think you're being modest. You're more than capable of being on this webinar and being a part of this discussion today. So we wanted to bring you in because of your background and your knowledge, of course. So let's jump right into it here. So I have some questions for Viv and Kristi here. So I think the first question is, let's start at the basis, 101. What is a knowledge management platform? Viv, do you want to take this one? And then Kristi, you can share your thoughts after that.
Absolutely. Thanks again, Kristi, for that awesome introduction. One thing I do want to say, like Kristi has schooled me on a lot of things in the last, I've got to know her in the last, I guess, couple of months, and she's given me an amazing amount of insights because she's been in the space for at least obviously 8 years and more than that from a career perspective. So thank you so much for that. Going down to it, I mean, our thought around, and we've kind of got to it after discussion with a bunch of our clients, it's kind of discovery is kind of the key component. That's what I think Kristi was talking about. Discovery of information is kind of, if a knowledge management tool cannot, surface out smart information, either through a search interface or a browse interface, and a smart browse interface, an intelligent browse interface, realistically. And that's what, in my viewpoint, is that information that is already there has to be discoverable and searchable and and findable, whatever you want to call it. That's kind of like my definition of a knowledge management tool, and that should do that job reasonably well. And then and to some extent, what shouldn't do is really kind of, I don't think knowledge management tools are into data analytics really. So that's a separate kind of function. There are a bunch of tools that do data analytics. I don't think a knowledge management tool goes into that level of details. Data analytics is discovery, and search is probably, in my viewpoint, that's kind of the thing. What do you think, Kristi?
Yeah, I agree, because I mean, that's what we've separated ourselves from the market and saying that we're really the specialty in data and analytics. I do think that a knowledge management system, what people want it to be, is this place that, and it should be this place that can point you in the right direction. So you've got your question, and it can give you at least the spot in which you can find your answer. And then also, I think though, what people often forget about knowledge management is it's even it's a tool that should tell you what you don't know, so that you can have confidence in saying, hey, I don't know this information. We actually haven't invested in this in the past. And you can feel confident that you are spending the right money in your budget to go find out new information. And so I think that's the opposite side of that, is what we often don't think about. And it's part of the ROI story of implementing a knowledge management system, is what's that information that you actually making sure that your budget is being spent wisely.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It's not only what you finding out what you do know, but what you don't know, and I think that's an interesting point there. Viv, in terms of what it should do and what it should not do, what are some things that you think that people think that a knowledge management platform will solve for that are kind of outside of the lines and not really within the framework of it? Is there anything that comes to mind there?
I mean, most people don't think of knowledge management initially as a productivity tool. Frankly, I've talked to tons of customers of QuestionPro. Frankly, they use, like Kristi said, they use SharePoint. It's not their job. A lot of times, it's not their job to make sure that information is disseminated to the right stakeholders. And I see that as kind of a long-term problem. Like, just because if your job is just to do the research and present it, and not get it disseminated within the organization, then obviously that money is going to get lost, not reused. I almost look at it like the internal version of a intranet/wiki, which is kind of like the evolved version of that, really, right? So if you don't have the system, you're kind of your efficiency rating is going to be reasonably low. And that's kind of what most, in my mind, that's what a knowledge management platform should solve for, is going to improve that efficiency rating.
Got it. That makes sense. Let's jump into the next kind of topic here. Kristi, what are the top reasons to use a knowledge management platform?
Well, I think the number one is I think when you're starting research, knowing what you know is the most important component of that. And so it's when you have a business question, you're starting research because you have a business question. And so you have your business question, and regardless if you actually have the answer or not, you need to be building on top of your past knowledge. And so even if you come up with like, oh, good, we should be placing this study because we don't have this information, no matter what, you should be placing that study with the previous knowledge that's around that topic. So a knowledge management system really is that platform that's going to give you the understanding of the base understanding of where you're starting from to then build on top of. Too much today inside large organizations, what we're doing is we're we're just letting we have a leaky bucket. We have all this information flowing out. So our base, we're never starting from a base. And so we really need to just be building and building and building and building on top of that base instead of having a leaky bucket starting from the beginning every time.
Yeah, I also think another reason to use it is, employee churn, right? If you don't have a repository of information, like, obviously, employee churn is going to happen whether you like it or not, and therefore, when, especially in the smaller teams, when there's, the churn happens, then you lose pretty much all the tribal knowledge if stuff is not structured and discoverable and organized. So that's kind of like from a business, continuity perspective, this kind of obviously gives everybody some solace in the fact that all the information is not going to get lost when once somebody leaves and somebody else joins, and they're starting from ground zero and not from, wherever the last person left off.
Right.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, especially if that main person that has all that knowledge has been there for 15 years decides to leave, then all of that information is essentially lost. So that's a good point. Kristi, what are some knowledge management platform best practices that you've seen throughout the 8 years that you've been in this space?
Yeah, I think the major piece to it is it goes back to the saying of crap in, crap out. Like you have to have a really good system to get information in. And I've seen different ways of executing that. I've seen it with the more of the traditional, you assign someone inside the organization to load that data in and be the keeper of that. I think that's the most common that I've seen. I've also seen technologies in which they, instead of relying on people to load data, they point to the data. So I think there's a number of creative ways to solve that, and not one right way, but it is definitely a critical component to successful knowledge management is how do you get the information in?
Right. And Viv, what are some of the best practices you see there, or kind of adding on to Kristi? What are some of your thoughts?
No, I think the more I've talked to clients, it's really getting adoption and data into the system is kind of like hyper important. That's one component. The other component really is getting adoption from a consumer's perspective. Like people who want the data should be able to easily access the data. So, getting adoption going is fairly challenging. Frankly, it's not just producing research, but getting people to kind of like believe the fact that that's where we go. That's where we go to the knowledge management tool before we, talk to the researchers potentially. That would be the holy grail, because now you have like I wouldn't say self-service, but definitely like a highly efficient way of like looking at finding data, then asking somebody like, hey, do we need more, or we need to commission the study because we have a hole, and democratizing that. So I think that's kind of what we are, to some extent, what we are aspiring to do.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I think that just to add on to that, I think sometimes it's easier to think about the negative than the positive. So I'm not trying to be negative here, but one thing that I think is a really big opportunity with knowledge management platforms is the adoption component, which Vivek was just talking about, I think the opportunity with these platforms today is really getting in depth into the intertwining themselves into the workflow of the insight professional. And we see that with other knowledge management platforms that are out there today. So I think Google is a great example of that. I can add a link to in Slack for Google Drive. I can easily share things with people inside Google Drive. I also create documents inside Google Drive. So they have figured out how to work themselves into this workflow that I have inside my company. And they're great for general knowledge management, but not market research, because we're so nuanced. And so I really think a big opportunity area for the knowledge management platforms is on the adoption side, and thinking about that creatively, and really how do we get into much more of the workflow of the insight professional instead of staying absent of that.
Right. That makes sense. So do you see it as you need to assign someone that, hey, you're the gatekeeper or you hold that information to get it into the platform, or is it more of a workflow initially getting the projects in, APIs, or a combination of both of those? What do you see that works best there, Kristi?
So yeah, so in my opinion, for what I've seen, and from what, in my opinion, is based on like all these data points that I've seen over the number of years, has been the least effective is having one person be the gatekeeper and putting information in, because you've just created a bottleneck.
Sure.
The most effective is workflow and APIs, because that is the workflow requires humans, but it's just more, it's an easier part of their day and enables them to do it more often. And then the API is just more like the most seamless component. APIs are tricky because it's like, okay, how do you get that information in when it's not coming from one place? With KnowledgeHound, it's easier because we have APIs into survey platforms. And so there's just like a point in time that study's finished and it rolls right in without a human having to touch it. With documents, I think it's a little bit harder because it's like someone has to say, yes, this document's finished, versus with a survey,
Right.
we know when it's finished, it's complete. So, but those are like the three ways of getting information in. I think there's more advantageous ones and then less advantageous.
Got it. That makes sense. Makes sense. So let's move on, and then but let's talk a little bit about what should an organization just getting started look out for in a knowledge management platform, or be on the lookout for rather. So things to kind of look for, whether it's features or functionality. What do you see that they should be at least keeping in mind?
Yeah, I think this problem starts happening even on a practical level when your researcher count goes like, say, north of 5, really, right? So if you have a very small team, then I mean, a lot of these problems can be solved, just human capital and operationally. But once you have more than 5 or 10 researchers in a team, then even internally, cross-pollination of cross-communication. I've talked to teams that say, like, forget about external stakeholders. We have a tough time just, our research team has grown from 2 people to 7. And through COVID, obviously, like, cross-pollination is not happening. And in fact, even our researchers don't know what the other researchers are working on, and so on and so forth. So I think that's another kind of area. It's not necessarily specific to knowledge management, but it's kind of more along workflow realistically. So, so my belief is that, you should kind of like to, partly because of, we do need to combine the two concepts together, or at least the closer these two concepts are together, it's going to be useful for the organization overall at the end of the day, because we want to solve the workflow issues, we solve communication issues, and then also obviously the knowledge management kind of that workflow will actually create the knowledge, create the information.
Interesting.
So when companies are looking for kind of tools, discovery and kind of adoption, let's assume discovery and adoption are two kind of broad buckets that we need to focus on. And then within those buckets, what are the kind of the components that make up discovery, and as Kristi said, like, we also believe that, like, having workflow as part of the solution is going to be critical in the adoption phase. And obviously from a workflow perspective, it actually helps you in terms of managing a project, intake project, outtake, and so on and so forth. And then how the project moves through multiple cycles, and then gets, having all that information on a project being one central kind of a manageable location that is tagged, attributes, and so on and so forth. So all those things kind of come into play.
Yeah, I think we've seen some players in the market that are more open to partnering with other tech companies, and we've seen those who are less open to partnering with other tech companies. And so I think there's this mentality sometimes of like, no, my platform, my knowledge management platform can do it all. And the problem is that there's so many different capabilities that other people can do, other technologies can do. And so I would really look for a platform and a partner that is open to collaborating with other vendors, meaning, like, can they pipe in video? Are they willing to partner with VoxPopMe? Are they willing to partner with Big Sofa? Can they partner with Salesforce? Now I'm just making up stuff, but I think getting a good sense for if people are willing to have kind of more of an open ecosystem and getting more information into your platform by partnering with others is a really good way to vet a knowledge management platform, as if they're kind of forward thinking, or maybe kind of, I think it's kind of an older school of thought, which is my platform can do it all and we're the most amazing at everything. And so just that can be a red flag sometimes when talking to vendors, if they're like, no, we don't partner with anyone else.
Right. I think that's a good point. And Viv, you and I have talked about this, I know, around it's not just survey data that you need in the knowledge management platform, also qualitative data, maybe secondary data as well. So combining all those sources into one platform is something I know that we were looking for and on the lookout for, and I think have helped solve for. But what do you have to say around that?
Yeah, so even not only that, like primary data, but I even have a vision around this, like even secondary sources of data that people are producing for certain industries make more sense. We are kind of heavily invested into automotive. They're like, we're not the only guys, obviously we help companies produce primary data, but there's like tons of secondary data available, syndicated content that's available. That is not streamlining into it. And in many cases, I even talk to customers that are literally paying for that secondary data, but they're double paying for that same secondary data because two groups in the same company have purchased the same license, literally. So paying and happily, obviously, anybody would sell it to you if two groups of the same company. And I said, is the licensing agreement only for your team? They're like, no, our licensing agreement is for everybody in this company. Well, why? But we looked in and we found that we have no way of telling the other group that, oh, well, we also already have access to this Forrester data. We already have access to the Gartner, and Forrester, Gartner are obviously the big ones, but there are very industry specific, production mechanisms that we can pipe that content into a central repository. But for that internal kind of, I think Nancy is talking about it a little bit, like internal kind of stakeholders have to know that this is the place where we go first, really. So that's kind of almost like a kind of marketing exercise internally to kind of educate everybody inside the company, like, hey, if you need answers to questions, this, go to, insights.fi.com. All right, that's the place that you go to, and you kind of set up that kind of stronghold. And survey data comes in, Vox Pop Me, Big Sofa, and then secondary data also can come in, projects that have nothing to do with your team doing the project. It's obviously purchase data, so that thing is, that thing can also get piped in.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Especially when you bring the secondary data, Kristi, then you can really find out what you don't know. I mean, I think that's really the powerful thing behind that. I want to kind of shift gears a little bit and jump to a question that Nancy Cox brought up here around behavioral change in workflows for both researchers and business partners. How do you incentivize, reward, or sustain that change? I know we've talked a little bit about that, but I think this is a good question. She goes on to say that, for the researcher, it feels like another task by the time you're tired of a project. For other users, the self-service needs to be immediately rewarding. So is it an incentive thing? Is it incentive that you get the data at the end? What are some things there? What are your guys' thoughts around that?
Yeah, so here's the thing, is if it feels like a chore, then the technology is not doing its job.
Good point.
And they, we've even at KnowledgeHound, we've even run campaigns where we, to get people to train on the platform, we'll do gift cards for completing a training and all of that. And to me, I'm always pushing back with my team. It's if we have to give gift cards to get people to want to log into the platform and train or need to be trained, our technology isn't doing its job. And so I've never had to get a gift card or an internal incentive to share information on Slack or Microsoft Teams. It's really, it comes down to the technology. And so with these knowledge management platforms that exist today, a lot of them just do not provide enough value to get people to use it without giving them an incentive. And so the incentive there's a great book called Hooked, and it's all about driving adoption. And the reason why people adopt a technology is because it answers a problem at the moment they have that problem. And so as a technology, these platforms need to be meeting the user exactly when they have that problem, so that they answer immediately, and that's the reward. And that's what's going to drive them coming back. Now, where I have seen it be successful is when you have a project management system linked with the knowledge management system, because because project management, you have to go through that process to initiate a study. And so it's more of a by force, they have to use the platform because that's part of the workflow. And so project management, linking that with knowledge management can be successful in helping drive adoption.
Yeah, and Nancy, I think that's a great question in terms of like, the researcher feels that this is another chore, and like Kristi said, like I think one solution is obviously linking kind of project management so that it's actually helping the researcher. The other solution that we are kind of obviously going to envision is operationally, making sure that everything that the researcher needs is in that system. Like if they're doing a survey, at any point of time, they have if they're in fielding mode, they know exactly what's going on. That's operationally helping the researcher, literally, right? So like, okay, they don't have to go send 3 emails saying that, hey, are we done with data collection? Is it in, report production right now? So both the researcher and the research managers have a kind of a, bird's eye view as well as an operational view around what's going on from an ops perspective. So that helps them. Obviously, so hopefully, we think that drives adoption, but that also drives kind of like the knowledge management layer on behind that, realistic. So it just hopefully doesn't become a chore. It's like, oh, this thing actually helps us from one perspective, and then on the stakeholder side, stakeholders can subscribe to topics and subscribe to events, ideas, and we'll talk about tags and things like that. So stakeholders can automate it, from an automatic mechanism. You don't have to go out and say like, hey, look, I want to know every time somebody does a B2B research study with the research group, because I'm in charge of the B2B group in the company. So anybody tags any research as B2B, I want to know about it. So that kind of combination, we want to bring that combination together. So that's kind of one mechanism. And the other one is actually what was an interesting idea that came from one of our clients, is almost gamifying the research kind of process to some extent. So the people whose research are being looked upon higher, or being tagged higher, or being consumed higher, their name surfaces up on a leaderboard, for example. And we do this with sales all the time. Like, look, people who sell more, we have a leaderboard mechanism. It's a little, looks out of the ordinary, but it helps us kind of help the researcher kind of say like, look, I produced this research and my research was consumed the highest this month. Because all that is trackable, really. I mean, if you think about it, we obviously know that every time somebody clicks on one of our research reports, we know this group has clicked on it. So there's a kind of like some sort of a kind of like a visual impact kind of model that we can build. And I think that would be a good way of kind of like again motivating folks to kind of bring that collaboration between stakeholders and researchers.
Great. No, I think that's a good point, and hopefully, Nancy, that answered your question there around the incentives and building it into a workflow. I think Kristi made a good point where, if you're having to incentivize via gift cards to get somebody to use your platform, probably need to rethink a few things there. So that's interesting. Let's move into a couple more questions here, then we'll get to kind of teeing up the InsightsHub and the demo, and then we can do a Q&A at the end of that as well. Kristi, what are some examples of how a knowledge management platform has helped democratize research data within a company? I know talk a lot about going there to find information, but have you seen that knowledge management platforms kind of like bring it together and have like full scale adoption there in terms of research data, or what are some examples of that?
Yeah, I think when we've seen it really, some examples of super successful launches have been when when the launch of a platform, or even just kind of like a relaunch, or when the platform's used in let's call it like a pending event, some major event that's happening inside the company. So, and a great example of this was there was a client that we had that they were doing their annual planning with their sales team. And they had this offsite where they needed, and the agenda was all about how do you be consumer focused and all this sorts of things. And so they had their main objectives for the year, their sales goals, and they said, all right, now let's figure out what our consumer needs to drive then to know how we're going to meet these sales goals. And so they pulled up their knowledge management platform, and the entire 100+ people of sales folks are in the same room with their knowledge platform, which KnowledgeHound plugged into. And they're sitting there like just typing away on thinking through like, okay, what do we know about this part of the consumer? Maybe that's something we should be exploring to hit our sales numbers. And so it was just like this amazing way to democratize information across an entire team to then drive revenue. And I thought that was just a fantastic example of the power of democratizing information and directly linking it to sales.
Got it. I think that's a good point. There needs to be some sort of like impetus to like really launch this in some big event. So I think that's really interesting. I think we know we've answered a lot of questions. I think even this next question I was going to ask, maybe kind of hit on this a little bit, unmet needs and areas of opportunity. So I think what we'll do now is jump right into the Insights Hub, and I'll go over a few slides and show you what it's about, how we thought about it. I know Viv covered a lot of this already, but we'll just kind of tee it up of how we're thinking about the Insights Hub, and then Viv will jump into a demo, and then we'll leave a little bit of time at the end for Q&A as well. So the Insights Hub, a lot of what we talked about is true, and what we're trying to accomplish here with workflow. We've seen a lot of struggles with workflow even outside of the Insights Hub, but I know as Viv mentioned around needing that workflow to get the data in, and also Kristi mentioned this as well. So that's something that we solve for, like the intake process, managing projects, getting status updates on projects, and then of course all of that data flowing into the Insights Hub for knowledge management when they need it is something that we're doing, and that flows into the discovery. So we've seen, obviously, Kristi and Viv talked a lot about this around, after the insights are presented, the data is collected. A lot of times there's not a meaningful repository or searchable data, key findings, and as Kristi mentioned, Microsoft isn't always built for research and what you need to find there. So that's something that we've addressed here. And I think what's interesting is the knowledge graph. So really building upon research that's already been done. So what do we know? And also what do we not know? And how can we build upon that in the future? So with this comes the Insights Hub. So the Insights Hub, as we're launching it, is a consolidated platform to organize, explore, search, and discover all your research and an organized repository. So last year we brought you the research and insights with the research edition and community. This year is really around the Insights Hub and what can we do to continue to bubble up that knowledge and get it out to the stakeholders that need it. And that's what we've solved with the Insights Hub. So you mentioned it's not just bringing in QuestionPro and using that as a searchable method. It's also bringing in other data from some of our partners at Hub UX, Drama UI, using KnowledgeHound as well to integrate in. And then finally, communication. So being able to seamlessly communicate the status and send out those messages via Slack and Teams. So we're fully integrated with those other research tools as well. And really wanted to spend a few minutes to talk about the integrated workflow and really to help optimize time and transparency. So think about it like a Monday.com or project management tool for researchers with integrations for all the tools that you use, as I mentioned, with Hub UX, Drama UI, and obviously other platforms out there that we'll be adding in there now that you can use. But really an intake where you can have different project types, and then someone can come request the project, include any information they need, and then that flows into real-time status notifications and insights library and so forth. And then finally, like the fun part is the continued discovery. What can you do with the data? Obviously, you can tag it, make it searchable, and have the project summaries and materials all live in one place. As Viv will show you, we have this concept of nuggets and stories that really help add on and incentivize the researcher to do more and want to put more information in about the projects, whether that's uploading it, getting it from APIs, or just entering the text as well. These are all things that you can do with the continued discovery. You can see things like how much should we spend on sample? What about project management? And really get the combination there. So it's not just the data, it's also some analytics that go along with it. So you can easily see ROI on projects and obviously your research overall. I'll just jump into a few of the key benefits of the Research Hub. There's obviously, many benefits listed here, but I think, added transparency, no loss of information. Kristi and Viv spent a lot of time talking about that. I think that's one of the key components of it. And then really just the enhanced knowledge management platform, but really the democratized data and getting it out so that everybody has access to it will help elevate, I think, insights teams and also alleviate some of the bottlenecks that we see where you're always going to one person or having that, kind of one source where everyone's trying to get to them and they're busy and it's just not really efficient. So these are a lot of the benefits of the Insights Hub. I think, Viv, now you'll take everyone through sort of a demo and show you the great things that we've done and have built to date. So Viv, I'll stop sharing and then I'll let you share your screen and you can take it from here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. So I think you guys can see my screen right now, right? So, just a quick background. So we started off the Insights Hub project. So late last year, I think we've been at it for about 4 or 5 months now. And we're in, at this point, from a very practical level, we are in kind of alpha/beta testing mode with a few of our customers. So that's kind of the game plan, is to kind of roll this out along with our customers. And I'm trying a new, obviously I've launched a bunch of products. I'm trying a new idea out this time around where we really kind of are going to embed ourselves with 20 or 30 customers deeply and try to solve for them throughout the summer and throughout this year, and then launch this product later on effectively. So getting right into it, we talked a little bit about, I'll talk a little bit about workflow and things we have. We created this concept of project types, which are like effectively different kinds of project that you do from a research perspective. And then you can kind of like very quickly, as you can see, we can quickly go in there and edit and add options and questions to the project. So this is really to help solve the problem of, like, if you want to do a product testing, I don't have one, hold on, let me kind of find a decent one over here. If you want to do a concept testing study, do you want to do it in the US or global? How many concepts are you doing? And so on and so forth. So all these simple questions can be answered up front. What that does is, puts a project into the queue. Once it's in the queue, you can then mark it as active. There's, anybody in the team can say, like, I'm gonna pick it up. I'm gonna mark this project as active. It's a very, reasonably simple project management model, and you can mark it as different statuses and so forth. This is where it starts getting interesting. So we have these concepts of pricing model and key metrics. These are all dynamic options, really. So you can say, like, well, for every project, I want to measure certain things, really, from a price perspective. So you can create as many, kind of think of it as many fields around a project as possible. So, and different companies have different ways of thinking about it. Some people want to measure sampling. Some people want to measure programming costs. Some people want to measure, outcomes, and so on and so forth. So the idea here is you can kind of, these are all customizable and say, like, well, we want to measure for this particular project, we want to measure this. And the reason we built this was simply because a lot of our customers were using, frankly, Excel to do these measurements, to say, like, hey, we did like 55 projects last year. How much do we spend in sampling? And if I asked that simple question, nobody could give me a straight answer. Like, yeah, well, we think we spent somewhere between, 500 and 800 grand this year, really. And so this helps kind of solve that problem around, like, hey, how much are we doing? What are all the metrics we want to measure on a per project basis? You put all the metrics in, and then as you go through the project, obviously, you can, the researchers are going to, update these metrics as they go along, realistically. On the operations side, this is where we are kind of from a product perspective. Like, obviously, this is is one of our products, so obviously it's going to link to QuestionPro, and then you can link the survey. If it's a survey that you're linking, it'll be a survey. If it's a Trauma UI project, then it'll link to the Trauma UI. So our vision is that we integrate with all the operational kind of research tools that you are running. If it's VoxWatchMe and HubUX is already done, so we are going to one by one roll in and see, like, okay, all the tools and technologies that folks are using, and we'll obviously, like every product company, we'll do some prioritization and say, we'll roll these kind of integrations out first and these integrations out second, realistically. And so what that does from a project perspective, so you have one view, you have a project view, and you have like potentially like 2 or 3 different technologies you're using to kind of collect data and solve the problem. So you can have one view as to what's going on with that. This is where things get interesting. We've kind of created this concept of themes and nuggets, and we'll start making sense a little bit more. Think of themes and nuggets as kind of what you would put in your, effectively in your kind of executive summary for a particular project. So here's what we learned, and here are kind of like nuggets we learned realistically. So let me just kind of move my Q&A. So, and each of these are, they're fairly simple and editable. The reason we want to keep these themes and nuggets, we're kind of following this concept of atomic research, where like instead of saying like, hey, look, we collected data, we produced a result. There's a lot of things happens in between. And we want to create this concept of themes and nuggets, which are atomic units of information, really. And these are kind of obviously like, very similar to almost every research project I've seen. There's some sort of an executive summary that says like, hey, we did this project and these are the 5 things that are really relevant and important. We found 50 things, but the 5 things that matter are here. So we want to kind of put that thing as a separate element itself, so that it's searchable, typable, and then and this goes to the knowledge graph component, which I'll talk about in a minute. But this having that atomic unit that like, look, we know this particular element. People between the age of 30 and 45 don't prefer this. That's a unit of measure. That's a unit. We call it, obviously, that concept in UX research is fairly well utilized, not in market research, but in UX research that has been fairly well adopted. I think that same logic applies in market research also, which is create this concept of nuggets effectively. And the last component is obviously like reports. You can upload all kinds of files, and Kristi is going to clued me onto this. Not only can you upload files, which kind of starts becoming a chore, but our vision is that we'll plug into Google Drive and or SharePoint, Office 365 really. And so if you have a folder where you're storing all the project files in, we can just slurp that data in intrinsically, so you don't have to sit around and shuffle files and upload them. So that's part of the vision right now, but obviously we don't have it yet. That's part of the vision, effectively, is to kind of integrate deeply with at least Google Drive. For sure, we'll do the integration with Google Drive, but then naturally that yields integration with Office 365 also. The one other thing that I want to kind of really point out is we kind of created this concept of meta tags. So think of meta tags as kind of your taxonomy for the business, really. So, and these are like, obviously tags that you can create. Anybody can create a tag effectively, and then add a tag, and then add a bunch of elements to the tag. So here you can see there's B2B, B2C, you can remove any of the tags effectively. It doesn't have to be research oriented. The concept here is it's business taxonomy. So think of your business taxonomy, how people look at the business. We're working with American Cancer Society, and they're like, look, we have different kinds of breast cancer that we work on projects on, and we want to, and you have 5 different tags for 5 different types of cancer that you're working on, and then there's research being done in each of those, and so on and so forth. So that kind of concept, you create that business taxonomy. And what happens is when you kind of like do the projects, you obviously, as you can see over here, you kind of tag the projects, the same tags that you are available. So, okay, this is a B2B and a B2C project, and that doesn't make sense, but effectively you can get the idea that you can tag the projects. This becomes relevant simply because when you go down to the search interface, so you can say like, I want to search for, all vehicle, everything tags with vehicle, really, for example. So you can search by vehicle, and you can see all the tags for the projects. As I talked about earlier on, the themes and nuggets are just shown up front. So the visual interface is, this is the problem. This is kind of the highlights of the solution. These are the tags that are available. These are tags that are relevant to this particular project. And if you want more details, obviously you go into it. But the idea here is like we want to surface out the relevant information through a simple search interface that's available up front. Also, there's a browse interface, so you can see all the tags available. So if you want to see like, look, I want to see all the projects that are marked as health, and then probably remove that. There you go, perfect. So everything that's tagged as health will show up over here. So you can go down. There's a browse interface also available. Small, whatever it's tagged as, that will show up over here. So that's kind of like, that's why the tagging is important. And kind of like, again, this goes to discovery effectively. So how, we want to try to make it, hyper easy for folks to kind of get access to information, produce that information. And obviously this is linked to, a variety of different things. The final thing is like, that I want to kind of really touch base on, and also, is kind of, we create a portal for every single, every InsightsHub will have a customized portal where, that'll be obviously customized on a per client basis. Clearly it'll be, it'll be behind the firewall or behind the single sign-on provider, and we're integrated in Google Okta and 365. These are the standard ones that pretty much 99% of all our customers use. Between those three platforms, pretty much Okta covers almost all the single sign-on models that are custom effectively, and between Google and Office 365, we cover everybody else. So, people who have access to the information, it's kind of obviously gated through this process. It's pretty straightforward stuff. And a little bit like, we created this concept of programs that's like, on the project side, as you saw, that there were like different types of projects, the general projects and then market research projects. These are just categorization models effectively to say like, hey, we are doing, 3 or 4 different kind of programs that we are running for different types of projects. So we can quickly see like, okay, what is the status of each of those projects in each of those kind of programs effectively. So we can have some aggregation model. When you go down to the analytics, you can see like how projects are doing in terms of all the different programs, and how many projects are we doing on a per month, per week, per day basis. And you can see how, what the kind of operational elements are. These are more operational, not necessarily the knowledge management side. On the knowledge management side, we're also creating this concept of stories. So we believe that, once you have the tags, we have the concept of stories. Stories are kind of things that are beyond a particular project. So these are kind of like concepts that you are tracking and say like, okay, the B2B concept, these are the few stories we have. So for vehicle, these are the stories we have. And the idea that we have over here is these stories are stackable effectively. So the concept here is like at any point of time that's what we know about it. Later on, something else, you stack that on top of it, really. And then later on, you stack almost like a source code repository. So like, this is the version of the code at this point, and this is the version of code at a later point, and this is the version of the code at a later point. So the same underlying concept. We're obviously calling that stories, which is like, this is what we know about this particular element at this point of time. And then later on, we find out more. So you add that on. So, and then you have then you have a pretty easy view of like, these stories then show up over here. And then you can go to the vegan story and say, on June 11th, this is what we know about the vegan tag. And then, if somebody a researcher adds another story on top of it, then that'll show up as the pinned and the latest story, really. Anything that's tagged over here on the right-hand side, you'd see that everything that's tagged to that vegan, the details of the projects are available. So you can see this, these are the nuggets and the themes that are available with this project, and this is the story available with this project. So that's kind of the concept that we have so far, that we are betting on so far. I think that's about it. And there's the last one thing that I do want to this is not obviously live, in production, or I can't do a live demo of it, but we are creating this concept of like Dan talked about, knowledge graphs on presentation mode. And I'll just walk you guys through a couple of screens of what it's going to look like. So remember, we talked about like nuggets being individual atomic units. We want to tag each of those units with concepts, really. So, when each of these nuggets, as you can see on the screen, is going to get tagged with, different, again, we are calling this a knowledge graph, so different components of a knowledge graph. So we learned this, and this is linked to this particular element in the knowledge graph. And so once that is done, as you can see, and it'll be a hierarchical element, so you can kind of have parent-child relationships in the node. So that gives us the flexibility around saying, like, at any point of time, I want to learn everything that I want to know, every piece of insight that we have around solar, for example. So you can go into energy, go down to solar, and say, like, this is all the information that we've learned over all the projects. Then that is cross-project, not necessarily on a per project basis. Across projects, if we have all the nuggets individually tagged to a particular to one or more nodes in the knowledge graph, then from a knowledge graph perspective, we can display all the items that are available. So that's how we kind of intend to solve the knowledge graph problem, and then that's the first step in that direction. And once we get into that, then automated tagging, automated linking, and then also kind of cross-linking and cross-pollination of nuggets between we can start measuring that information. So which items are linked to which items, we will start gathering that data, and once we have that data, we can surface out even more interesting ideas in terms of which nuggets are actually relevant, which nuggets are contradicting each other, for example, or which nuggets are better than each other. So that kind of information will start surfacing up as we go through this process. So that's about it.
Hey, Viv, one question came up, I think, around that. And does that mean that we'll have the ability to kind of predict behavior or predict things that researchers should look into, or how do you see that sort of working out in the long run?
I mean, I wish I could say I could predict a lot of things, but I think first is to get the knowledge graph in a way where we have some data that the linking can be done really between nuggets really. So right now, each of these nuggets are not linked to anything else, right? It's, for the most part, if you think about it, we have a lot of information, but they are not structurally linked to each other. So our vision is that, like, if we start linking it even through simple things like tags, then the tags becomes the focal point. Then we can do pretty simple analysis to say which tags are the most relevant and the highest used. And that's kind of the center of the conversation, really. So that's probably the most important nugget. And then we can obviously crowdsource some of the elements like and things like that. Like, okay, these tags are being used quite often. So another quick thing that we are doing, both from a gamification perspective, going back. So I showed you this kind of the InsightsHub, this is kind of the quote unquote the portal. So every time somebody within the organization clicks or searches for something, we are tracking that. So we know that this person was looking for a story around vegan, right? And once I click that, so now what we are going to do is to that's how we are going to do the gamification side. It's like, okay, look, the person who produced the research story around vegan gets a point, really. So they are going to get credited with that element that users are looking into your story. So that's how we're going to connect the dots between the researchers and the consumers / stakeholders of the hub, really.
So that's some of the gamification you were talking about earlier then.
At least that's the basics of the gamification of how we think about this.
Got it. And then one question that came in here was around this kind of interesting question around knowledge management platform. Do you see it primarily on the more of the, I guess I'll reframe this question. So is academic institution, is it a good use for the knowledge management platform?
I actually talked to a couple of professors, and I don't think it's a good one. I think the use case is primarily targeted towards enterprises. To be honest, it's not necessarily where typically within an academic institution, maybe there's some amount of sharing within a small group, but it's not disseminated within an institution realistically. There are other kind of like cross-platform tools. In fact, there are 2 or 3 like cross-platform where you upload data and it's available to everybody else realistically. And that's what a lot of researchers in the academic community use. We probably are not the best suited for that. The use case doesn't solve for academic kind of use cases. I mean, you can produce the research, but this is not going to be very effective. It's really targeted towards enterprises and kind of solving that problem.
Got it. Okay, makes sense. And then Viv, I'll share my screen now if you don't mind.
Yep.
Just to get back on. Okay, and then we have a few more questions coming in here. So Nancy Cox, again, she asked, as a researcher, could I search by key stakeholder to see what research is being consumed, how to best influence it? Is that an option there?
Yeah, that's a great one, Nancy. We are tracking every single search and every single click from a stakeholder perspective. So in theory, I should be able to tell you which stakeholder is interested in which topic, at least in theory. Not even in theory, on a practical level, yes, we are. So I think we'll use that information to kind of surface out like this stakeholder was seriously interested. And we also have this vision where the stakeholders can subscribe to topics, like each of those tags that you saw. A stakeholder will come and say, like, every time there's something, anybody who tags anything as B2B, notify me. So that's how we want to keep that, flywheel spinning, is like, the stakeholder gets notified saying that a new piece of research regarding B2B came online. They don't have to come and kind of like, browse and search for it. There's a push notification that goes out to them. And then from there, hopefully they either get the information or they can come back to the hub and get more information and drill down right into it. So going back to your question, in theory, yes, we are tracking who's doing what effectively within the system. And we use that information, I guess, post facto to surface out relevant information. You have a point around like, going back to stakeholders and letting like as a research manager, like, okay, look, these are the 5 topics that everybody is searching for. really, right? So, and that gives you intel into like what are people looking to find from the portal itself. And it's interesting information for us also, like for everybody, like, okay, this is what people are searching for. Are we solving for that really? And that's what I want to do over the next, 3 to 6 months in terms of kind of like making sure that cycle, that flywheel is spinning effectively with some of our key customers.
Interesting. I think that's a good point. We'll probably have time for 1 or 2 more questions here. Emma Martinez, she asks, I think maybe more on the public sector side. Is there a way to view projects that work for public engagement, not just market research projects? So I guess kind of a different use case for it. How are we thinking about that?
I don't know. I don't know. A simple answer to that is I haven't thought about it. We are kind of like reasonably focused into research and insights right now, and not necessarily making this a public portal like anybody can come and search for data. If that's the question, we're not thinking about it. Like, I think it'll be gated, at least at this point, with the way we think about it, it'll be gated behind some kind of single sign-on firewall process. We've not kind of made this into like a public. There are other tools that are available, like open data, data.world, actually out of Austin too, where you can just post information as a public resource realistically for any kind of research project you've done. As a you can upload SPSS files, CSV files, Excel files, and create a narrative around that. We're not going to compete in that particular space. It's there are a bunch of tools available to do that. We are probably not that. At least this tool is not going to be designed for that particular use case from a public participation perspective. The kinds of research you do are kind of irrelevant. It's really like exposing that to the whole world and having a public portal is not something that we're thinking about right now.
Right. Makes sense. And then Viv, if people want to use this, be part of that beta that you mentioned and continue on, reach out to you or reach out to Viv or myself, and we can get on the call with you to see if it's a good match and so forth. But I think with that, we can wrap it up today. Kristi, thanks so much for joining us on this launch. Really appreciated having you. If you want to connect with any of us, feel free to do so here. We have all information. We're easy to find on LinkedIn and elsewhere. So Kristi, Viv, thanks so much for today.
Awesome.
Thanks. This is great.